I found an STD diagnosis in my wife's bag after 12 years of marriage. For most of my life, I believed that loyalty was a simple thing. You build a home, you protect it, you show up every day. I was never the loudest man in a room, but I was the one who stayed late to finish work, the one who remembered the school forms, the dentist appointments, the birthdays, and the small promises. I had a good job with steady pay, and I liked the quiet pride that came with providing. My wife liked nice things, and I liked seeing her smile when I could give them to her. I was not perfect, but I was present. We had been together almost 12 years, 2 kids, a house that always felt a little too small during winter, and a routine that felt safe because it never surprised us. Mornings were lunches, backpacks, quick hugs. Evenings were homework, noise, and the television low in the background. I thought that was what a good life looked like. Then little changes started to pile up like dust in corners you stop noticing until it is everywhere. She began staying late at work. She said projects were piling up and her boss was pushing deadlines. She came home with her face already tired, her answers short, her phone always in her hand like it was part of her. At first I tried to be helpful. I cooked more. I kept the kids quiet when she walked through the door. I told myself this was just a season, a difficult period, something we would laugh about later. I even bought her a small necklace one weekend and asked if she wanted to take a day off together. She smiled like she was trying to remember how, and said maybe next week. Next week never came. And the thing that bothered me most was not the late hours. It was the distance, the way she looked past me, the way her silence felt planned, like she was saving her real words for somewhere else. I kept telling myself to stop being dramatic. People get stressed. Marriages go quiet sometimes. You do not throw away 12 years because your house feels colder for a month. Then my own body started sending signals I could not ignore. Nothing graphic, nothing dramatic. Just small symptoms that did not make sense. The kind of thing you try to brush off because you have kids, you have work, you have responsibilities. I told myself it was an allergy. Then I told myself it was just exhaustion. When it did not go away, I finally booked a doctor appointment. I went alone on a weekday morning, sat in a bright room that smelled like disinfectant and old magazines, and watched the clock like I was waiting for permission to go back to my normal life. The tests were quick, the doctor was calm. He asked standard questions, and I answered them without thinking too much, because in my mind there was only one answer that mattered. I had been faithful. I had nothing to hide. I left with paperwork and instructions and a promise that someone would call. A day later, my phone buzzed at work, and the message asked me to return the call as soon as possible. I stepped into an empty hallway, listened to the doctor explain that the results showed an infection, one that is typically passed through intimate contact. He spoke gently, like you speak to someone about bad weather. My mouth went dry. My first thought was that it must be a mistake, that labs mix things up, that a number gets typed wrong. The doctor asked me if I understood. I said yes, even though I did not. He asked if I had any questions. I had too many and none I could say out loud. I drove home later feeling like I was watching my life through glass. I did not tell my wife that night. I told myself I needed proof. I told myself I needed to think. I told myself that maybe the doctor would call back and say sorry, we were wrong. But the paperwork in my pocket did not feel like a mistake. It felt heavy like a stone. The next day the kids were loud in the kitchen, and she was rushing out the door with her hair still damp. She kissed the top of my head without looking at my eyes, and said she would be late again. Her car backed out, and the street swallowed the sound. I stood there for a long time holding my coffee until it went cold. I did not decide to search for anything. I did not decide to spy. I just started cleaning, because cleaning is what you do when your mind is too loud. I wiped counters, folded laundry, organized the kids' drawers. Then I went to our bedroom to put away a stack of clothes, and I opened her nightstand. The top drawer was the usual mess. Lip balm, a receipt, a pen. I pushed things aside looking for space. My fingers touched paper, folded and tucked under the edge of the drawer. I pulled it out without thinking, and when I unfolded it, I saw a clinic letterhead, a doctor name, and the kind of words that make your vision narrow, the kind of words you can read twice and still hope you read wrong. My hands started shaking, and in that moment the whole house felt too quiet, like even the walls were listening. I stared at that document and realized something even worse than the diagnosis. Someone in my home already knew, and they did not tell me. And I heard my own breathing like it belonged to a stranger, and I knew I could not put that paper back and pretend I never touched it, because whatever was happening had already moved past denial, and I was standing in the middle of it, holding proof that my life was not what I thought. And I could hear my kids laughing in the other room, completely unaware that everything was about to change, and I did not know if I was more afraid of what I would say to her, or what she would say to me. When she came home late again tonight, with that same tired face and those same short answers, and I would be waiting with a paper in my hand, and no safe place left to put it, and no way to unlearn what I had just learned. She came home later than usual that night, The kids were already asleep. The house lights dim, the kind of quiet that feels heavier after a long day. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the paper folded in front of me, not neatly, just folded enough to fit under my palm. I did not rehearse what I would say. Every version in my head sounded wrong or weak or angry. When the door opened, I heard her keys drop into the bowl like always. She walked in and stopped when she saw me sitting there. She asked if everything was okay, her voice careful like she was stepping on ice. I slid the paper across the table without looking up. I did not accuse her. I did not raise my voice. I just pushed it toward her and watched her face change as she read. The color drained slowly, not like shock, but like recognition, like something she had been expecting. She started talking fast, saying my name, saying, "Wait, please let me explain." I stood up before she finished the first sentence. I told her I did not want to hear it. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. She reached for my arm, and I stepped back. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears, loud enough to drown out her words. She said it was complicated. She said it did not mean anything. She said she was sorry. The word sorry felt small in that kitchen, like it did not belong to something this big. I grabbed my jacket and keys. She followed me to the door, her voice breaking now, begging me to stay just to talk, just to listen. I turned around once and told her to take care of the kids in the morning. Then I walked out. The night air felt sharp on my face. I drove without music, without a plan, until I ended up in front of my brother's house. The lights were still on. He opened the door in sweatpants and concern, took one look at me, and stepped aside. I sat on his couch and stared at the floor until the words finally came out. Not all at once, just pieces, the diagnosis, the paper, the look on her face. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he handed me a glass of water and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "You can stay as long as you need." I slept on his couch that night, but sleep came in short pieces. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the paper, her face, our kids laughing earlier that day. The next morning, my phone was full of messages, missed calls, long texts, apologies mixed with explanations. I did not open them. I muted the conversation and put the phone face down. My brother made coffee and asked what I planned to do. I told him I did not know, but I knew one thing. I could not go back and pretend this was just another difficult period. After breakfast, I drove to work and told my manager I needed personal time. He did not ask questions. I drove straight to a law office I found online the night before. Sat in the waiting room and watched couples on the wall smiling in framed photos that probably meant nothing now. When the lawyer called me and I told my story slowly, leaving out emotion and sticking to facts. She listened and took notes, explained my options, talked about custody schedules and assets and next steps. Hearing my life reduced to procedures and timelines was strange, but also grounding, like someone had finally put borders around the chaos. I signed papers with a steady hand that surprised me. When I walked out, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I had chosen a direction, heavier because I knew there was no turning back. I did not go home that day. I stayed at my brother's place again, played with my kids over video call while my brother sat nearby pretending not to listen. Seeing their faces made my chest tighten. I told them I loved them and I would see them soon. I did not explain more because they did not need details. That night, I finally opened one of her messages. It was long, full of regret and promises. She said she wanted to fix things, that she would do anything. I closed the message without replying, because I knew that if I answered, I would either say too much or too little, and neither would change what had already happened. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized something painful and clear. Trust does not break all at once. It breaks quietly, and by the time you hear the sound, it is already gone. The days that followed moved in a strange, slow rhythm, like time had decided to stretch itself thin just to see how much I could carry. I went back to the house only once that week. During the afternoon while the kids were at school and she was at work, I told her through a short message that I needed some clothes and personal things. She replied immediately saying she would stay away and give me space. Walking into that house felt unreal. Everything was exactly where I left it. The photos on the wall, the shoes by the door, the small marks on the wall, where we measured the kids' height every year. I packed a bag slowly, stopping too often to stare at things that suddenly felt like evidence of another life. I opened drawers and closets with the calm of someone who no longer expected surprises, but my body was tense like it was waiting for something to jump out. In the bedroom, I avoided the nightstand completely. I did not need to see it again. When I left, I locked the door carefully like habit still mattered. The next few days were filled with calls from lawyers, emails from school, and short updates about the kids' schedule. Everything felt transactional now. Even communication with a woman I had shared a bed with for 12 years had turned into logistics. Drop-off times, pick-up times, who would take them to practice. She kept asking if we could talk in person. I kept saying not yet. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I was afraid of what would happen if I did. I was afraid I would soften. That familiarity would blur the line I had finally drawn. One evening my brother asked me a question I had been avoiding. He asked if I wanted to know the full story, who it was, how long it lasted. I told him no, not yet, maybe not ever, because the details would not give me peace. They would only give my mind more images to replay at night. What mattered was not how it happened. What mattered was that it did, and that it reached me in a way that could not be ignored. A few days later, I got another call from the doctor. Routine follow-up information, treatment steps, nothing dramatic, but hearing it again made everything feel official, like the last door to denial had closed. I handled it quietly and responsibly, because that is who I had always been. Even now, when anger would have been easier, I did not tell anyone beyond my brother and my lawyer. I did not want sympathy. I wanted stability. The first time I saw her again was in a neutral place, not planned, just unavoidable. It was outside the school when I came to pick up the kids, and she was already there. For a second, we both froze, like two people who knew the same secret but were not allowed to say it out loud. She looked tired, thinner maybe. Her eyes searched my face for something. I nodded politely and focused on the kids, helped them with their backpacks, asked about their day, kept my voice calm and even. She tried to speak once, just my name, but I did not respond, not because I hated her, but because I did not trust myself to stay composed if I did. The kids sensed the tension and stayed close to me. That night after they fell asleep at my brother's place, I sat alone in the dark living room and realized how much had changed in such a short time. A month ago, my biggest worry was whether I would get a bonus at work. Now I was learning how to live inside a split life, half father, half man, rebuilding himself. The court date was approaching slowly but steadily, and with it came more paperwork, more decisions, custody plan schedules, holidays divided on calendars like someone had taken scissors to time itself. I prepared everything carefully, not out of revenge, but out of responsibility. I wanted my children to see that even when things fall apart, you handle them with dignity. The night before the hearing, I barely slept, not from fear, but from anticipation, like standing on the edge of something final. I did not know what I would feel when I saw her across the room, if anger would rise or if nothing would, and that uncertainty weighed on me more than anything else, because I had built my life on knowing where I stood. And now I was walking into a room where the past and future would sit facing each other, and only one version of our story would move forward. And I would have to accept that no matter how calmly I told my truth, it would still hurt, and the quiet man I had always been would have to learn how to carry that pain without letting it change who he was. The morning of the hearing was clear and cold, the kind of day that makes everything feel sharper. I arrived early and sat in the hallway outside the courtroom. People passed by speaking in low voices. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. When she arrived, I did not look up at first. I recognized her presence by the pause in the room, by the way the air shifted. Eventually, I lifted my eyes and saw her sitting across from me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to remember. She looked smaller somehow, like the space between us had taken something from her. Our lawyers spoke quietly on either side of us, exchanging documents and nodding. No one asked us to speak to each other, and I was grateful for that. When we were called in, we took our places and faced forward. The judge spoke in a measured tone, asked routine questions, confirmed names, dates, details. It was all surprisingly calm, almost boring, and that made it worse, because something so personal was being handled like a schedule adjustment. When it was my turn to speak, I told the truth plainly. No anger, no exaggeration, just facts. Length of marriage, children, living situation, and the reason I had filed. I did not look at her while I spoke. I focused on the desk in front of me, on keeping my voice steady. When it was her turn, she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for everyone to notice. She said she was sorry and that she wanted to fix things. The judge listened and nodded, but reminded her that reconciliation was not the matter being decided today. When it was over, we were told the next steps and timelines. Custody arrangements temporary but structured. Assets to be reviewed later. We stood up at the same time, and for a brief moment our paths crossed near the door. She whispered my name again. I stopped this time, but did not turn around. I told her through the space between us that we should keep communication focused on the kids, and I walked away. Outside the building, I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. I expected relief, but what I felt was a quiet emptiness, like the echo after something falls and finally stops moving. That afternoon, I picked up the kids and took them for ice cream. They laughed and argued over flavors and asked when we would all go home together again. I told them that things would be a little different for a while, but that they were loved and safe. They accepted that answer with the trust only children have. That night after they were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table in my brother's house and looked at the custody calendar. Days marked in different colors. My life divided neatly into blocks. It was clean and organized and deeply sad. In the following weeks, I settled into a routine I never planned for. Work during the day, kids on my days, evenings quiet when they were not with me. I cleaned my own place, cooked simple meals, and learned how loud silence can be. She followed the rules we had set. Messages stayed short and focused, updates about school health schedules. Sometimes she added a sentence about missing us. I never responded to those parts, not because I did not feel anything, but because responding would open a door I was not ready to walk through. One evening, while organizing paperwork, I found an old family photo slipped between documents. A vacation from years ago. All of us smiling, sunburned, happy. I looked at it longer than I should have, then placed it back and closed the folder. Some memories deserve respect, even when they no longer define your future. I started therapy at my lawyer's suggestion, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand how something so solid could crack without me noticing. The sessions were quiet, thoughtful, focused on boundaries and self-respect and the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I learned that being kind does not mean accepting harm, and that walking away can be an act of strength, not failure. Slowly, the weight on my chest began to ease, not because the pain disappeared, but because it stopped controlling every thought. I slept better. I laughed with my kids without forcing it. I felt like myself again in small moments. Then one afternoon, I received a message from her that did not fit the pattern. She asked if we could talk not about the past, but about something important she had discovered. The wording was careful, restrained, and for the first time in weeks, I felt that familiar tension return, because I sensed that whatever she wanted to say was not finished yet, and that the story I thought was already closing might still have another chapter waiting to be opened. I read her message more than once, not because it was long, but because it felt deliberate, every word measured. I did not reply right away. I waited until the kids were asleep and the house was quiet. Then I asked what it was about. She answered that it concerned the past months and that she thought I deserved to know. That sentence alone was enough to tighten my chest. We agreed to meet in a public place during the afternoon, a small coffee shop near the courthouse, neutral ground with people around. When I arrived, she was already there sitting by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup she was not drinking. We did not greet each other like we used to, just a short nod. She started speaking before I sat down, her voice low and steady. She said she had gone back through old messages, emails, calendars, trying to understand how everything had gotten so far out of control. She said that during that time at work there had been pressure and confusion and poor decisions. She did not give details, and I did not ask. Then she said something that made me finally look at her directly. She said that there were things she had believed that were not true. Assumptions she had made about our marriage, about me, about herself. She said she had realized that she had been living in a version of reality built on avoidance, and that when it collapsed, it took everything with it. I listened without interrupting, my hands flat on the table, my expression neutral. She told me she had started counseling too, not to fix us, but to understand herself. She said she was not asking for forgiveness or another chance. She just wanted to take responsibility without excuses. Then she reached into her bag and placed a small folder on the table. She said it contained statements and confirmations that corrected earlier misunderstandings, including timelines that mattered for legal reasons. She slid it toward me and said my lawyer should see it, that it might affect how certain things were viewed. I did not open it there. I did not want to react in front of her. I thanked her for bringing it and stood up. She asked if that was all. I said yes. Outside, I sat in my car and finally opened the folder. It contained documents that clarified dates and decisions. Nothing dramatic, but enough to change how responsibility would be understood moving forward. It was not a gift. It was an acknowledgement, and it mattered. I sent the folder to my lawyer that evening. She called me later and said this would simplify things, reduce conflict, possibly shorten the process. Hearing that felt like releasing a breath I had been holding for months. The following weeks passed more smoothly. Fewer messages, fewer complications. The kids adjusted to the routine, started asking fewer questions, finding comfort in predictability. One evening, my son asked if I was sad anymore. I told him sometimes, but that being sad does not mean being broken. He nodded like he understood more than I expected. Work picked up and I threw myself into it. Not to escape, but to rebuild momentum. I started running in the mornings, simple, quiet miles before the world woke up. It helped clear my head, helped me feel present in my body again. The legal process moved toward resolution. Meetings became confirmations rather than confrontations. One afternoon, my lawyer called to tell me the final date was set. After that, everything would be official. I hung up and sat there thinking about how strange it was that an ending could be scheduled like an appointment. That night, I went through old files and photos again. Not with pain this time, but with acceptance. Some things ended, some lessons stayed, and I was still standing. The night before the final hearing, I slept deeply for the first time in a long while. No dreams, no tension, just rest. When morning came, I felt calm, not excited, not afraid, just ready. I did not know what I would feel when it was over, but I knew that whatever came next would be built on honesty, not illusion. And that was something I had earned, even if it came at a cost. And as I walked out the door that morning, I realized that suspense does not always come from waiting for disaster. Sometimes it comes from standing on the edge of a new life, unsure of its shape, but finally certain that it will be real. The final hearing was quiet and brief, nothing like the weight it carried in my mind for months. We sat in the same room, but it felt different now, less charged, less heavy. The judge reviewed the agreements, confirmed understanding and intent. Signatures were placed where they needed to be, and just like that it was done. No speeches, no dramatic moments. A chapter closed with paperwork and calm voices. When we stood to leave, she looked at me. Once, not with regret this time, but with acceptance. I nodded and walked out without stopping. Outside, the air felt warmer than I expected, like the world had moved on without waiting for my permission. I drove home alone and sat in silence for a while, letting the reality settle. Later that day, I picked up the kids, and we spent the evening together, cooking dinner, laughing at small mistakes, telling stories. Nothing special and everything important. They did not know it, but that day marked the beginning of a steadier life. Not perfect, but honest. In the weeks that followed, I noticed changes in myself. I was more present, more deliberate. I no longer ignored discomfort hoping it would fade. I paid attention to what I felt and why. I learned that trust starts with listening to yourself before offering it to someone else. My life became simpler but clearer, fewer assumptions, fewer excuses. Sometimes late at night, I still thought about how easily things can shift without warning, how quickly certainty can dissolve. But those thoughts no longer scared me. They reminded me to stay awake inside my own life, to value truth even when it hurts, and to remember that being kind does not mean disappearing for someone else. It means standing fully in who you are. And when I looked at my children sleeping peacefully in their rooms, I knew that despite everything, I had chosen the right path, not the easiest, but the one that allowed me to move forward without lying to myself. And that was enough. Life did not suddenly become easier after that, but it became quieter in the right way, the kind of quiet that gives you room to think instead of pressing in on you. Days settled into a rhythm. Work mornings, school pickups, simple dinners. Weekends with the kids felt fuller because my attention was no longer divided. I noticed small things again. The way my daughter concentrated when drawing, the way my son asked thoughtful questions when he thought no one was listening. I rebuilt my home slowly, not by buying new furniture or changing walls, but by changing habits. I stopped rushing through moments. I stopped apologizing for needing space. I stopped explaining my boundaries. Communication with my ex remained respectful and limited, focused on what mattered. There were no late-night messages anymore, no emotional swings, just coordination and distance. And that distance was not cold. It was healthy. Sometimes people asked if I was angry, if I hated her. I told them no. Anger fades when you stop feeding it. What remains is clarity. I understood now that love without honesty becomes something else, something hollow, and I had lived inside that hollow space longer than I realized. Healing did not come as a single moment. It came as many small choices made consistently. Choosing sleep over rumination, choosing movement over stillness, choosing truth over comfort. One evening while cleaning, I found that same nightstand document copied and filed with legal papers. It no longer made my hands shake. It was just paper now, a reminder not of betrayal but of awakening. I put it away and closed the drawer without hesitation. Months later, standing in the kitchen watching my kids argue over who would do the dishes, I smiled at how ordinary it all felt. Ordinary had returned, not the old kind built on assumptions, but a new kind built on awareness. I did not know what the future would bring. New relationships, new challenges, new versions of myself. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never ignore my own voice again, because the moment I listened to it, even when it led me through loss, it also led me back to myself. And that was the part of the story that mattered most.